The Oregon and Washington coastline offers incredible opportunities for outdoorsmen in the Pacific Northwest. Clamming, crabbing, bottomfish, and salmon all capture our attention. But surf perch are often lost in the fold. On today's episode, join us as we target big, hard-fighting surf perch in Southern Oregon. Right now on Day One Outdoors. The outdoors is not a hobby. It's not our passion. It is our way of life. We can make the perfect cast, slow our breathing to execute a perfect shot, spend hours researching locations and techniques. Regardless of effort, we fail. This series is not about incredible bites. It's not about trophy animals. Our goal here at Day One Outdoors is to educate our viewers utilizing new technology to offer a different perspective. Watch as we research new areas, plan out the day, and adjust to changing conditions. If it were not for other experienced outdoorsmen teaching me along the way, I wouldn't have this life. I owe it to them to pass this knowledge along. I owe it to you. Join us here on Day One Outdoors, and let's learn how to become more successful in the field and on the water from day one. As a child, I would spend hours on the beach during family vacations fishing, but without much luck. I've always wanted to return to the coast and determine what it takes to be successful on the sand for surf perch. My good friend Chuck from Pavati Marine kept sending me pictures of giant perch being caught in Southern Oregon. Finally, we made a plan to head south. Surf perch are a mystery to most anglers in Oregon and Washington, myself included. I took a moment to learn about these impressive fish. Oregon is home to nearly 10 species of surf perch. Today, we are targeting 2 species in particular: red-tailed surf perch and striped surf perch. Perch are found from Mexico all the way into British Columbia, among rock piles and sandy beaches of our shores. Surf perch are a rare species of fish that give birth to live young. So because she's pregnant and actually giving birth right now, we're going to go ahead and put her back. Steve caught this beautiful fish, and we want to make sure that the species continues to flourish out here on Southern Oregon coast. Okay, here we go, ready? Back she goes. Just like that. Here in June, the days are the longest of the year, giving us ample opportunity to build a pattern over the course of one day. Today, we have 2 incoming tides to target these fish. The day is starting off calm, but the typical afternoon wind on the coast is imminent. We made our way to the beach, and it was time for the day to begin.
Yeah. started our way down the beach, and I had to stop at this spot right here. There's a bunch of nice rock outcroppings just as the tide's starting to turn. And this looks like a nice secluded soft spot in the waves. The type of structure that you want to look for are these breaking waves. When the waves start to break, you know that it's starting to shallow up. If you start to see a wave crest and then it flattens back out, that means that there's a dip in the bottom of the ocean right here where there's a nice spot where the fish can sit and lie. So this may not be the best spot. It's fairly uniform depth from what it looks like looking at the waves, but I had to stop, take a look, and see what's out here. So we're gonna give it a couple casts before we continue our way on down the bank and catch up with Chuck and Steve.
Well, you know, it's kind of a time and place thing. You got to locate them. It's kind of a hunting deal. You got to hunt them out, find where the schools are at. So you know, you got to stay moving. You know, depending on each day, it could be different spots. So it really just depends on the conditions. You got to really get after it and chase them. So.
We're only about 30 minutes into our first morning out here on the southern Oregon coast, and we started out by casting way out towards the big boulders that are about 30-40 yards offshore. Steve over here caught the first fish of the day, and then I started bringing mine in a little bit closer and caught one within about 10 yards of the shoreline. As soon as we did that, both Steve and Chuck started casting it close. We put 2 or 3 more and got another one in the bucket. So instead of always having to cast 30-40 yards out there, sometimes you can get them right in tight to the beach. Doesn't take very far of a cast, get into these good fish. Surf perch are a school-length fish, and so when you catch 1 or 2, you want to try and stay in the same spot. We've caught 3 or 4 fish right here in this area, but we haven't been bit in the last 5 minutes or so. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to move about 100 yards down the bank and see if we can get into some more and find another school before the tide changes.
Yeah, in tight. Right in tight to the beach.
We have been able to find a few fish during the first high tide of the day, but the tide is beginning to recede and the wind is picking up. We may need to adjust our techniques to continue our success on this next tide change.
Well, it's time to move. I gave this spot a shot for the last 15 minutes. Tide's really starting to run out. We have a short window for surf perch, so we're going to keep on moving down the bank and see if we can't find a nice school. They're here, we just need to find them.
Fishfield is your one-stop shop online for the gear you need here in the Pacific Northwest and beyond. From salmon and steelhead, saltwater, trout and kokanee, even crabbing. Visit fishfield.com today to place an order with no sales tax and have the gear you need shipped fast. Fishfield.com, we have what the Northwest outdoorsman needs.
Every once in a while, a new lure comes along that catches every angler's attention. It could be because of all the irresistible colors and finishes, or the patented skip beat action. Or maybe it's the wide variety of sizes designed for salmon, trout, walleye, steelhead, mackinaw, and more. But just for the record, we know one thing for certain. We didn't design the maglip to catch fishermen. Yakima Bait Company.
So far in this episode, we've been having some success right here at high tide first thing in the morning. Now these fish have been a bit difficult to catch only because I'm not familiar with where to find them. So what we're going to do right now in this week's Mondo Pad is break down the structure that we're finding here in Southern Oregon and talk about where to find these fish if you want to go out there and target them yourself all along the Pacific Northwest coast.
So as you can see, this is a absolutely gorgeous, beautiful inlet along the Oregon coast here just south of Brookings, and it's a fairly shallow bay. You can tell that by all the rock piles that are extending out several hundred yards off the bank here. So what that's going to mean is as the tide recedes, it's going to start exposing a lot of these rocks. Now, this is where the structure starts coming into play. As you can see, these waves are coming in, starting to crash over some of our rocks right here. And as the tide is starting to drop, these rocks will become more and more exposed. You can tell what rocks are submerged and where you can find these rock piles further offshore just by watching the waves. So pay close attention to the waves as they start coming in towards shore. And if there's a rock that's only about 6-8 inches underneath the surface, down to a foot or two on some of the bigger swells, you'll see it come up and crest right over top. And then as the swell passes, you'll see it slightly exposed in behind. So pay close attention to these swells as they're coming in towards shore, especially in the first 40-50 yards off the bank, because that's about the extent of our casting distance. So let's go ahead right now and break down the type of structure that we're finding these fish. We started out this morning with an early high tide, which gave us a great opportunity to catch these fish close to shore. But now as the tide is beginning to recede, we're having to adjust our locations. As you can see, we're set up right here along the shoreline, fishing this indentation right along the bank. Now what this indicates is a deeper pool straight off the shoreline in this area here. And we can also tell that by looking at the break on the waves. You can see that the waves on either end of that indentation are starting to crest and break right along these edges with a lower crest right there in the middle. That indicates a deeper spot in the ocean itself and a great place for these fish to lie during the outgoing tide. So we can also tell there's a lot of great structure here too. There's a point of rocks that comes all the way out along this edge and then back into shore. That gives us a great opportunity to target these fish where they're going to be feeding. So as you can see, the waves are going to be coming, crashing over the tops of these boiler rocks. And what that does is it dislodges a lot of bait fish, or excuse me, a lot of bait for these fish to target. These fish are opportunistic feeders, and most of the times they won't be sitting on the outside of these rocks. Where they're going to want to sit is on the edges and in behind these rock points. They're going to wait for the waves to crash over top of the rocks and dislodge any food off the edges of the rocks and off the bottom of the ocean and flush it around these rock points and these boilers, and they can feed right in behind them. So as you can see right now, we're set up again right here along this bank, casting to these areas in hopes of finding a few biting surf perch. Now again, as the tide continues to recede, we're going to move down along the bank just a bit further, fish this deeper hole right here, because that's where the fish are going to move off these boilers and into a little bit deeper water, try and have a bit more opportunity to feed. Because this is a shallow stretch of the Oregon coastline here, we see a drastic change in our water line along the shore. Now, we were standing right here along the shoreline, and you can actually see the old water line during high tide just a mere 4 or 5 hours earlier. The tide has receded drastically, and the point of rocks that we were fishing is now almost completely exposed. Where we were catching fish during the higher water was right along this wash rock right here. On the inside of it, the fish were piling up in here, and also of course off this point of rocks in behind these boilers. Now as the tide began to recede, of course we moved down the shoreline from this spot right here down about 30 yards or so, and we started catching them out along the outside of this boiler in this area here. Now our casting distance is limited to only about 30-40 yards in most cases. So as the tide continues to recede, you can move back along your shoreline, go out to this point of rocks, and walk out and stand on any one of these rocks out here, especially if you're wearing waders. That does open up a little bit more water for you out here, so you can catch fish, these surf perch, even during low tide events. But again, the best opportunity to catch surf perch is during the incoming tide. That's when they tend to feed best. Now that we have a better understanding of how these surf perch associate the structure, let's go ahead and head on back to the action and see how we develop a pattern during our low tide and of course our incoming tide that we're going to experience a little bit later on in the day. Stay tuned. We'll be back in just a moment.
salmon swim up to 3,000 miles to return to their exact place of birth to reproduce. Well, most of the time.
The afternoon was wearing on, and the tide was rising once again. We decided to get an early start on our second opportunity at these Oregon Coast surfers.
Dude, you're smoking them. Was that with shrimp again there?
Shrimp and the sandworm.
Shrimp and sandworm, got it.
Yep.
Oh, we're out of shrimp.
So there's more in there. Each cooler's got a little bag.
Okay, where's the other cooler? Because I need to put some on.
There's one right there.
Fish on. Right on. Up and down.
First cast, bobber down. These fish actually fight fairly hard. Pretty similar to a smallmouth bass is what we've been comparing them to here today. You know the fish is good when you get them 2 at a time, doubled up.
Yeah. Man, these things fight so hard.
Oh yeah. These steelhead rods, these Lamaglass XMG 50s, these are money for perch fishing.
So right now this afternoon, there's a lot of wind out here, and I've been fishing this bobber rig. And the bobber rig I was fishing before had 2 leads on it. I had an inline weight right below the bobber, and then I also had a smaller weight at the bottom. What I'm doing now is I'm switching up to a rig that only has a weight down at the bottom. So what that does is it keeps my line a little bit straighter. So instead of having 2 heavy points on my line that are constantly spinning in the wind, I now only have 1. And hopefully that'll keep me from tangling up as much because I was only fishing about half the time. So now I'm gonna go get some shrimp on these hooks, see if I can catch up to Steve.
Oh, that feels like a heavy one, but I think it's just a bunch of seaweed on it. Oh, that's a good one. That's a good type. Look how pretty these ones are. This is a real pretty fish. These perch we find near the rock structure. They like to have some sort of structure down in there, but they're just really pretty fish.
What's that? Look at the size of that thing. Oh, yeah. That's a surf perch right there. Look at that thing. Look at that healthy fish.
As the tide reached its lowest point and the fishing slowed, we took a moment to break down our setups and which have been producing the best so far.
Most of us are steelhead anglers, and we have an 8.5 foot to 9.5 foot rod. That's gonna be your ideal setup. Anything from a 6 to 12, 8 to 17 pound line rod will work just fine. You're not having to cast out too far, and you're really never using more than about 2 or 3 ounces of lead. And what I did on this trip down here to Southern Oregon targeting surf perch, I brought all my steelhead bobber and jig rods. And in fact, when I came here, when I arrived, I looked out, saw the waves, saw that it was a fairly uniform bottom out there, and just thought, well heck, I should be able to catch them on bobbers too. So I brought 3 different rods, and I've actually ended up setting up each one of them with different style of bobber rigs. So on this first one here, I'm using braided line, just like you typically do on your steelhead bobber and jig setup, down to a slip bobber because we are adjusting depth, longer cast, a little bit deeper. When the fish are in closer, I'm able to bring my bobber stop down into an inline weight, and this inline weight helps when you get a lot of rip, a lot of current at that mid-level in the water column, so it helps slow your presentation down. Then down to anywhere from 12 to 15, even 20-pound line, to a 3-way swivel, and off the 3-way swivel are just your simple basic eagle claw or pre-tied snells. Why we use these is because they're very simple to quickly reattach when you break off. So you just put the loop through your third eye there on your 3-way swivel, put the hook through the loop, pull it tight. You don't even need to tie a new hook and leader. It's already ready to go. And then on the end, we're using the Berkeley Gulp saltwater sandworm camo style or camo color worms. And these have been working fairly well. We've been tipping them with either sand shrimp or with already pre-cooked shrimp. And this actually has a double rig setup on it. So I have about 18 to 24 inches down to a second 3-way swivel, out to another pre-tied snell. And then I have a little bit lighter leader down here. This is 8 to 12-pound line, down to a snap swivel again, with a little piece of surgical tubing, and then a really small piece of solid core lead. Now the reason why I did this is because this will be touching the bottom, a lot like our bobber dogging rigs. So if this gets snagged up, either the lead will pop out or the tubing will break. That way I'm not losing my entire setup. All I'm losing is just the tubing and or the lead. Just switched up my rig, man. I've been watching you catch fish after fish here for the last hour or so. I've built mine pretty much identical to what you have, but I want to know how you're fishing this setup. So walk me through the setup that you're using, how far you're casting out, and how you're fishing it.
Okay. Well, I've got that same setup. So what I'm doing is I'm casting it out there as far as I can, or if I see something that looks like it's got some structure, I'm casting it in those places, letting it hit the bottom. And then I'm just slowly retrieving as I come in. Maybe maybe 2 cranks, 4 feet or so. And then I let it pause for a second, and then that's usually right when I feel the bite. Right after I make that little movement, which will bam, 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 like a trout bite. Okay. And you got to be quick with them. You got to hit it when they're biting on it, because it seems like they only give you like a 1-second opportunity. So.
Our day was quickly coming to a close as the sun began to set. Today was an incredible experience and some of the most fun I've had fishing in years. Guys, we just wrapped up here today. Beautiful day out there on the water. We had good success this morning, even better this afternoon, and actually had a part of the tide that we didn't expect. Now we have an entire 5-gallon bucket full of huge surf perch. I personally have never seen surf perch like this.
Those are they don't get any bigger than that.
We hope you learned how to be successful targeting surf perch here in the Pacific Northwest. Next time you find yourself at the coast with family and friends, bring a rod and enjoy what our beaches have to offer.